All right, so last time we talked about, are we enough? And this is something that we've all dealt with at some point in our lives, whether we measure up in our lifetimes. It's a sense of self-doubt, a sense of inferiority, a sense of unworthiness when it comes to our value in this world. And it's something that unknowingly some of us just carry that with us everywhere we go and carry into almost everything into our lives. For a lot of us, we're not alone in this. Everybody deals with this at some point. You think about children, you think about growing up, you think about the circumstances that they've been in, you think about your families. Some people in here have had some rough childhood. There's all kinds of measures and things that happen that start to build this wall in our lives. But when you think about it the most, it's generally when we're alone. It's a conversation or something that you're having with somebody. When you lay your head down on the pillow, it's that little voice that shows up in the back of your mind that says, am I good enough? Am I skinny enough? Am I young enough? Do I measure up? Did I do enough? How do I compare to someone else? Am I meeting all the expectations that someone else has for me? And what can I do to get better? And what's wrong with me? These are all thoughts that at some point in time we've all had in our lives. And we started talking about the story in Genesis chapter 3 of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And we started out with Adam and Eve, and they were getting ready to be tempted by the serpent. And he was telling them, if you'll eat this, you'll become like gods. And God had already told them that if they ate of that they would surely die. And so they were tempted, and Eve ate it, and then Adam ate it. And then it said immediately that their eyes were open, and they realized that they were naked. And at that moment in time, that enlightenment that they happened, they noticed that, and they immediately got the fig leaves and the things around them, and they created coverings for themselves. And we discussed this idea of what that nakedness really was. It was really just a meaning of saying that there was something missing. There was something not there. And it was brought to them an openness to show them who they really were. It took off all the coat, took off all the layers. But this story reflected exactly how we deal with our openness. When we find out that we've been opened or we've been found naked in a situation, we do the same things. We immediately try to cover up. We try to cover ourselves in that. It represents the beginnings of us putting on our mask, our layers. And that's the way most of us live. We put on a mask, a covering, a persona, a projection of the person that we want someone else to see. We're not going to let anybody in any closer than what we build those walls up. Because we don't want people to see our dirt. We're not going to let people see the mistakes that we make. We're not going to let people see that we're vulnerable or that we have weakness. We're just going to paint the outside of the barn and let the outside covering be decorated with only the best things. It's the idea that we do that. You can think about when you were dating or you met your wife or your spouse, or if you're dating someone, that the very first time y'all met, you put on everything you possibly could to present the best representation of yourself. I've said this before. Some of us took more baths than we've ever took in our entire life on our first date with our wives or our spouses. And sometimes we actually got cleaned up. We put on cologne. We cut our hair. We made sure we said all the right words. We did all the right things. We opened all the doors. We pulled out all the chairs. All those great, wonderful things that you're supposed to do on the first date. We did all those things because we wanted a second date. We would do whatever it took to do that. So we put on that best impression, whether or not that was really us or not. You met people before. They start dating someone, all of a sudden they start exercising. They start doing things they would never do before. They start eating healthy, and you're like, that man ain't never picked up a piece of any kind of vegetable in his life. And look at him. He's eating all these vegetables. He's doing all this running. Something's got into him. But the crazy thing is when we do that, when we put on that outside exterior and we try to be somebody that we're not, then what we're actually doing is putting a barrier between us and the people that we're actually trying to get close to, because we're not letting them see who we really are. And I'm not talking about just natural strangers. I mean, of course, a lot of times we put on a front in front of strangers because we don't know them either. We're trying to feel each other out. But I'm talking about your loved ones, your spouses, your children, your family, because we really want to be accepted, but deep down we're afraid. There's a fear in us that if we open ourselves up, that there's going to be some rejection, some kind of out there that says, you're not good enough. that you're really not going to like who you see on the inside of me. So instead, again, we just put on layers and we just keep insulating ourselves to keep everyone out at a controllable distance. We want to keep people out at arm's length. But that just makes all of our relationships more difficult. It makes our friendships more difficult. It makes our work relationships more difficult, and it makes our marriages more difficult. But most of all, it makes our relationship with God more difficult because we do the same thing to Him. We want to keep Him at an arm's distance because we don't want Him to see the dirt, just like Adam and Eve were. We just continue to put up the walls around us, and eventually we just isolate ourselves from everyone and everything that may actually have the potential of revealing who we really are. We spend all this energy trying to maintain this perfect exterior so that everyone thinks that we have it all together. We've talked about in this past few weeks that we don't need any help, that we have got it all under control. We want everybody to think that we have the perfect life, the perfect marriage, the perfect job, the perfect body, the perfect family. Whatever it may be, we will try our utmost effort to try to make everybody think that we are all right. We all think about living the American dream. We have our house, we have our cars, we have our 2.5 children that they say is average in most families. And when I hear numbers like that, I just immediately think about Andy Griffith. And I don't know if you remember this episode or not. It's my favorite episode in the entire world of Andy Griffith. When Opie is in school, and he comes home, and he's struggling with this whole idea and theory, and he's talking to his daddy, and he's like, they say, Daddy, that families have 2.5 children, or 1.5, whatever the number was during that time. They have 0.5 children in their household. And he said, Pa, I just don't understand. He's like, how do you have half a boy? And Andy goes, son, it's a ratio. And he goes, poor old Horatio, half a boy. And just as, funny as that sounds, that's the whole thing. When we think about our lives and we think about the coats and the exterior things that we put on, it's funny to think about when you look back because you see people do it all the time. And you look at them and you're like, man, I wish they would just be themselves around me because I really don't care, but they're just trying to put on this air about them that they have it all together, or that they don't want to say this, they don't want to cuss around you. Listen, when you tell people that you preach, people just immediately change. I mean, they change all of a sudden. I have been in places before and talking to people, and they'll be cussing up a blue streak. And I don't care. I mean, I've grown up around it all my life. I could care less. But then all of a sudden they're like, well, what do you do? Well, you do it? Yeah, I preach. Oh. And it just gets silent. Like, I can't do anything else right now because I don't know what the deal is. But it's just like they just put on this big picture, whatever. I'm like, whatever. But we all carry this stuff around. This is a struggle. All of our pains, all the weaknesses, all the stuff that we are concerned that if someone sees that they won't like us. It's just a fear that someone will see us for who we really are. And you remember at that point after Adam and Eve had sown on their fig leaves, they hid themselves. They heard God walking in the garden and they hid themselves. And God comes through and He's calling out to Adam and Eve and He says, where are you? Where are you? And again, God in all His omnipotence, every one of us in here know good and well enough that God knew exactly where they were. But I don't believe that God was actually looking for their location. I believe God was looking for their identity. That's who He sees. That's who He created. He created Adam and Eve and He knew who they were, but now that they had lost the glory and they were standing around in their nakedness and now they were covering up, they were not the same. And God was looking for the person that they created. So where is that person? Where is that person that we keep hiding? What is keeping us? What is holding us back from being who we were created to be? Adam and Eve, immediately after eating the fruit, they knew that something was different. Immediately. Things were not the same. They were feeling something, and that something was shame. Remember in Genesis 2:25, before this, he says that the man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. But Genesis 3 comes along, And Adam says, after God asked, where are you? He answered, I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid. All of a sudden, it goes to the point of telling you that they were naked and they were not ashamed. But now he's like, I found out that I was naked and I hid. Now he was ashamed of his real self. Shame is different from guilt. Okay? Yes, they had committed a sin, and they were guilty of that sin. But guilt says, I did something bad. I did something wrong. But shame, on the other hand, takes it a bit further and says, not only did I do something wrong, but now I am bad. I am defective. And that's what shame does. It tries to tell you who your identity is. It puts your identity in that sin and not outside of the sin where God created you. And this is exactly where inferiority and fear really starts to draw us in. It's not only did we do something wrong, but there's something wrong with me. I'm defective. I am not enough. The problem in all things, when I'm looking at this, if I'm looking at it from shame, then I look at everything in my life and I say the whole problem, everything that's going on in my life, the problem is me. The problem with my relationships is me. There's something wrong with me. The problem with my marriage is there's something wrong with me. There's something defective in me. The problem with my kids, it's me. It's me, it's me, it's me. I'm just lacking the things that I need to live this life. Now, whether we all want to admit it or not, or whether we want to come to any grips with it, or if we want to hide our head or whatever, at some point in time we've had this problem and we've had this thought. Before I met Hannah, it was 8 years before I had a relationship before Hannah. And that was on purpose because 3 years before that 8 years, I was in a relationship with a girl that I dated for almost 3 years. And everybody thought we were going to get married. And everybody thought we were going to do this thing and that thing and whatever. And the truth being is we hated each other. I don't know why we stayed together 3 years. It boggles my mind when I look back at it like, what was I doing? But for 3 years we were together and everybody thought we were going to get married. And I got out of that relationship and then I didn't date anymore. I got down on my knees and I prayed to God, I said, please send me the person that I'm supposed to be with. But now during that 8 years, when you don't have a date for 8 years and you're single and you're in your 20s, you immediately think, my God, what did I do wrong? I have had this. Am I that ugly? I mean, I know I'm not the best looking thing in the world, but am I that ugly? Am I that mean? Is there something wrong? I mean, literally, having these thoughts like, is there something wrong with me? There must be something wrong with me. That self-doubt tries to creep in all the time. And we carry this thing around us, and we never at that point in time when we're carrying that shame in with us, we never want to let anyone in to be able to help us with that because we're ashamed. And that's what shame does. It begins to eat us from the inside out. A University of Texas study of people that had been through some kind of traumatic experience in their life, and they dealt necessarily with rape, incest, and abusive relationships. And that was their focus. And what they wanted to do is they took two groups of people. They found the first group of people that had went through this traumatic experience had been someone that had told people about their problems. They had found in a group, whether it be a counselor, whether it was parents, whether it was friends, they found someone that they were accountable to, and they told them all the things that had been going on in their life. And then there was a second group. The second group were the same people that had the same traumatic experiences, different people, but just the same type of experience. And they kept it all on the inside. They didn't tell a soul. And what they found out was that the people that explained their problems or talked to people, and the people that held their shame in or held the problems in, that the people that held it in were destroying themselves on the inside. And they found out that the effects, the trauma of holding it in was actually rougher than what they actually had went through. It was eating them on the inside. Shame thrives in secrecy. It grows in the dark. But the opposite of that is also true. Shame begins to lose its power over an individual once it's exposed to the truth or to the light. True healing cannot begin until you are willing to face the dark things that are on the inside of you. The things that you carry around that you don't want anybody else to know. Whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be bad. It could be some of the good things, some prideful things that you carry on the inside of you. So tonight, the thing is I want to talk to you about this idea of accountability a little bit. Because here's the thing, and we'll go through some scriptures here in a minute to bear this out. But I want you to look in your own life, and I want you to think about things for just a minute. And I want you to think about this specific question. Who in your life knows your story, your struggles, and your secrets? Who in your life knows your story, your struggles, and your secrets? Who knows your story? Who knows your past? Who knows where you came from? Who knows about all the things that are going on that led up to who you are at this very moment? Who does that? For most of us in here, we have a spouse, and we should tell our spouses everything. Hannah and I, for good, bad, or indifferent, we tell each other everything. There was a preacher one time that told this story, and it's funny, but it's true. He said, he stood in the pulpit and he said, look, if you're having problems with your wife, and you're having problems where you think you're going to start cheating on your wife and you're going to have an extramarital affair, and you're thinking, he said, tell your wife. And everybody just paused just a minute, and he's like, seriously, tell your wife, because she's going to beat the hell out of you and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So who knows your story? For some of us in here, listen, some of our stories are not the prettiest things in the world. Some of us have had rough childhood. Some of us have had parents that were just overbearing, that just kept pushing us, that were perfectionists. And that we had to live up to some kind of standard, and we're still trying to live up to that standard today, no matter how old you are. Your parents may have been long gone and dead, but you're still trying to achieve a certain level that they left behind, that you feel like that until I reach this level, until I do this thing in my life, I'm never going to be good enough. Maybe you've got some kind of pain on the inside of you you've dealt with all your life, that something happened. And it's forced you to be who you are. That's why you do what you do. It's why you're so driven to do things, because you can remember back in that past. We went through Dr. Jack's lay counseling classes, and one of the things that Hannah and I learned during that whole situation while we were going through that was we learned more about ourselves than we did anything else, and that was a great thing, because we can look back, and I can tell you now, I could have told you a little bit then, but more so now, why I do certain things the way I do them. And it's because something my dad did, or something my family did, or just some experience that I've had in life that's caused me to adapt or to change, and this is why I do what I do. She knows why I get aggravated at certain things. She knows why I'm impatient about certain things. And it's just, parts of my past, parts of my story that makes me who I am. So who knows your story? Who knows your struggles? And your struggles will be the things that you're dealing with right at this moment. The things that are going on in your life that you just don't tell anybody about. Are you keeping things on the inside of you that you just, there's no way, like, I'm not going to tell anybody? I mean, it just seems like it's minor stuff. I don't need to tell. I don't need to burden anybody down with these things. And so you just keep them on the inside of you, and you just keep holding on to it. Maybe it's about your job. Maybe it's about your relationships. Maybe it's about your family. So who knows your story? Who knows your struggles? And then who knows your secrets? Who knows those things that are deep on the inside of you that you wouldn't even tell your wife for the most part, but you won't tell anybody? That's just sitting there. Things that you know that have come out that would just ruin your life, or you would feel like would ruin your life if somebody found this out about me. Who knows your secrets? Who knows your story? Who knows your struggles? And here's the thing. We need to tell our spouses. If we're married, we need to talk to our spouses. But guys and gals, we need accountable people in our lives. Regardless. It doesn't matter where you are in life, what station you are in life, what place you are, where you're going, where you're headed, whatever. We need accountable people in our lives. because we were never designed at all to go through this life apart. We were never designed to carry these things all by ourselves. And that's what the church is all about. When you look up the word church in the Greek, it's the Greek word ekklesia. It's called the gathering. It's not a building. It's not a place. It's not a location. It's the called out ones. It's the people that are called together to be a body. And that's what the church is supposed to do. We're supposed to be here for one another. Yes, we come together. Yes, we have our great services. Yes, we sing our songs. Yes, you get to stand up and hear people preach, and you get to teach, and you hear people, lead you in the right direction, inspire you. But we're here to build one another up for the work of the ministry. And how can we work in the ministry if we can't deal with our own issues, if we don't ever confront the things that are going on in our life? Because, again, if we never confront those things, if we never deal with those things, then the mentality that the church has is the preacher's going to take care of it. When we see people out in this world that are hurting and struggling or whatever, well, we'll just tell the pastor about it. He can take care of it. And we don't want to minister to people because we don't feel like we're worthy. Like we don't measure up. Like, I didn't go to seminary school. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. Do you know where I came from? I came from Drexel, North Carolina. Why would God ever use me? All these things will start to rise up the minute that we start to go forth and minister. That idea that you're not enough. Why would anybody want to hear my story? Why would anybody ever want to hear my testimony? But the truth is, your story is what will help set somebody else free. That inspiration, that what God has brought you through, what God's done for you in your life, will help someone else struggling probably with the exact same thing that you ever struggled with. That's what the church is all about. Paul says it this way in Galatians chapter 6. He says, "Brethren, even if anyone is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, each one looking to yourself so that you will not be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But each one must examine his own work, and then he will have reason for boasting in regard to himself alone and not in regard to another. For each one will bear his own load." Paul says that we are to bear one another's burdens and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. Jeff gave this wonderful example, and I'd never heard anybody say it this way, but I'm going to steal it. He's not here, so you don't have to tell him. But this idea of bearing one another's burdens, because there is, when you read this verse, there is two conflicting statements if you just read it. It says, bear one another's burdens, but then at the end it says, for each one will bear his own load. Well, that makes absolutely no sense. If I'm supposed to carry my own load, then why do I need to bear somebody else with my burden? When you're at first reading, it doesn't seem that, but it says, bear one another's burdens. When it's talking about this, the mental picture that they're giving you is of a stone, a very, very, very large stone that is you're incapable of moving by yourself. Okay? It is this idea that there's no way that out here, think about those strongman competitions with those big round boulders, and you go out there and they take those things and they heave them over their shoulders or whatever they do with them. But the idea is of this big boulder that there's no way humanly possible that you'll be able to move it by yourself. That's what a burden is. Those burdens are those things that we carry around that we just don't know how to get rid of. We try our best. We think about it. We read books about it. We study about it. But we just don't understand how we can get rid of it. And we try to carry that thing and it does nothing but weigh us down. And we've talked about weights in the past. Go back and read Hebrews chapter 12. We're supposed to lay those things aside so that we can run our race to the fullest. But then when it gets down to the end, it says that we will bear our own load. So there are things that we carry. There are responsibilities that each one of us carry, that we need to carry around in our life. It's our backpack. It's the things that we can carry around with us that we are to handle. But a burden is completely different than our load. So we all have our responsibilities, but there are things in all of our lives that are burdens, things that we just can't get past, that we need help with, that we need someone else to help us with. Proverbs 18:1 says that the one who isolates himself pursues selfish desires, and he rebels against all sound judgment. Again, Shame is that thing that isolates us. It puts us out there by ourselves. It tries to keep us in the dark, and it tries to keep us from seeking the answers, to seeking truth, to seeking help, whatever it may be. It isolates us. And what Proverbs says here, and what Solomon's saying here is not only does it isolate us, and I've told you a million times before that isolation has got to be one of the enemy's greatest tricks in the world. If he can get us by ourselves, then he can help us or force us to believe about anything. But it says that he who isolates himself pursues selfish desires. It all becomes about self. Think about all the things that you're going through. Things about the things that you've separated yourself out. Things that you're not telling anybody, things that you're just keeping to yourself and you're trying to bear. You're really doing that as a self-preservation technique. It's not because you're just this big, bad, awesome person. Because if you were this big, bad, awesome person, then you wouldn't be dealing with it in the first place. And you carry those things around with you and you think, I got this, I don't need no help. And really what you're doing is you're being selfish. Selfish in the idea that if somebody actually came in and saw what I was doing, they would freak out. So it's really, I'm protecting myself. I'm just backing up. Let me put this next layer on because it's just going to protect you from seeing my dirt. So why do we do that? Why do we isolate ourselves? Why do we hold back our shame? Why do we keep these things from people? And I'm just going to give you a few reasons. The first one is because you have that mentality that you can handle it by yourself. It's that John Wayne mentality that we carry around. Like we don't need anybody else. We fill our movies, we fill our lives with like Batman and all these people that go through, think about Rocky fighting on his own and all these other stuff. We idealize that one thing, that one person that's big, strong, and bad, and they can Rambo. Think about Rambo going out in the, taking on the entire Vietnamese army when he was in whatever. We have this idea that one person can just take over the whole world, and that's our idea. We want to be Superman. We want to be big. We want to be strong. And us guys want to talk around. We want to bow our chest out and like, I don't need any help. I'm tough enough to handle this on my own. So we think we can handle it by ourselves. The second reason we don't tell anybody is because we've been hurt in the past. Maybe you've been betrayed by a family member. Maybe you've been betrayed by a friend. Maybe you've been hurt or betrayed by a spouse. And you carry that around with you everywhere you go. And you start to put those layers on because you never want to experience that hurt or that pain ever again. You never really give your heart fully to anyone else because of that past situation, whatever it may be, whatever that hurt may be. I know that it didn't pertain to this kind of matter or matter of the heart as far as women or relationships in my life, but my dad would always talk to me about when I walked onto a baseball field. And he would always tell me that he was okay with whatever happened as long as I put my full effort into something. Now, we've all heard that. Put all you got into it. Go out there and leave your heart on the field, all this other stuff. But the way my dad explained it to me made more sense than anybody else. It wasn't trying to be motivational, and he wasn't trying to be like an expert in something. But he told me that if I didn't put everything into what I was doing, I would never get fully out of it what I was expecting. If I put everything into it, then I'm going to get everything out of it. If I put half myself into it, then I can only expect to get half of it out of it. And you think about your relationships. Think about your family. Think about your spouse. Think whatever. If you're carrying all these layers around you, and you're carrying all these walls, and you build up all this protection around yourself, are you fully giving yourself to that relationship? And when something happens in that relationship, can you look at that relationship and you think, well, that relationship was just an utter failure. I did everything I could do, but that relationship was an utter failure. When really, you were just putting half an effort into it, or a quarter of an effort into it, or just a little bit of effort into it and expecting the world in return. And that's the way we deal with things. We don't get our full... It's like living in a bubble. You've seen those big things that those kids play in now, those big like sumo suit things, the big round balls that they go in. They can run into anything because they're protected because they got that big bubble around them. And we take our relationships that way. We put that big bubble around us and we put this big wall around us, and people are only going to get so far. But you know what? I'm going to be protected. I'm never going to hurt ever again. But you're also never going to experience the fullness of life until you put 100% in, until you take the layers off and let someone in. The third reason that we do this is we don't want to burden someone. You think about the things that you're going through and you think about, you know what? I'm not going to tell my friend, or I'm not going to tell whoever. I'm not going to talk to anybody about this because, you know what? It's not really that big a deal, and they've got too much going on anyway in their life. It's just not that big a deal. I don't want to burden them with it. I don't want to hold them down. I don't want to weigh them down with something else. And again, this is just a self-preservation thing that you're talking to yourself about. I don't want to burden them down because really and ultimately, if they hear about it, then they're going to see a picture of something that's going on. They're going to see a weakness that maybe you've never shown anybody before. You're going to show them a flaw or some dirt that they never knew about you. But here's the thing. Not only are you denying yourself healing, but you're also denying the gift of God on somebody else. There are people in this world that have all these gifts and talents that God's given them that are encouragers, that are made for helps. They're made to help to bring healing and wholeness into people's lives. But if they never get approached or they're never invited to come in, you're never going to experience that. And then the fourth thing is that some of you are just the fear of the consequences. Again, if I let somebody know the things that have happened in my life, the things that are going on, they may not like me anymore. Or it could be bad enough that there could be some serious consequence. There could be some serious rejection out of this. It's that fear of loss, that fear of I'm not going to have this thing anymore. But as we're going to find out here in just a minute, that we need to get past that. We have to have people. We have to have this accountability. We have to share our stories, our struggles, and our secrets if we want to experience the healing that God has provided in His Word and through His church. So James 5 says this. James 5:16, he says, "Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed," or that you may be made whole. He says to confess your sins to one another, pray for one another so that you may be healed. God's laid it out in His Word, guys, that we're not going to do this alone. We are this body, that we are connected one another. And when we talk about that burden, and you talk about carrying that burden, I've given you this example before, but you think about people that are standing up here with their arms interlocked. We're connected. We're joined. And as we move, if we move together, then there's less burden and less pain and less stress, and we can all move kind of flexible together. But if somebody moves out of the middle and people have to reach and they have to overextend themselves, then that's when the object gets weak. That's when the church gets weak. That's when the wall gets weak, when the body gets weak. And if we continue to carry this burden on us and we continue to overextend what our bodies were extended to do, then we're putting something on our body that we're never intended to carry. And we're going to feel the consequences over time of what that may be. All that pain, all that struggle, all that weight, all that stress that we carry. Listen, guys, medical science has proven it over and over and over again. It is affecting our bodies. And we carry that stuff around, and the longevity of our life, the quality of our life can all be affected by all that stuff that we carry. But I'm not telling you that you need to run out here and tell everybody your secrets and your struggles and your story. Facebook is not the place to share your story, your secrets, and your struggles. Okay? Don't get on Facebook tonight and think, all right, I got 415 friends on Facebook. I'm going to light them all up. And I'm going to put it all out here, and all this stuff that I've been hiding for all these years, I'm going to put it all out here for the world to see. Facebook, Twitter, social media is not designed for you to post all your problems on. Okay? People do it all the time. You can find, if you want to find some good dirt and some good gossip, Go open, if you ain't on Facebook, go sign into Facebook. Go find one of your friends. I guarantee you, they've so-and-so's the devil and whatever. You can find out all kinds of mess on Facebook. But we need people in our lives. We need people that we're accountable to. And now listen, I know this is hard. This has to be hard because the world we live in today, everybody wants to take their gossip and they want to run out here. Again, we talked about this last week, that idea of just that comparison. If I can just find one little thing that lets me think that I'm a little bit better than you are, that I can just hold on that, well, you know what? They got it bad. Listen, they told me their story and whoo, I'm glad I'm not them. And that constant comparison, that nitpicking. But guys, we've got to lay that mess down. Just like Galatians says, brethren, if you find anyone in fault, if you find anyone in a trespass, you which are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. Each one looking to yourself so that you too will not be tempted. We can't get caught up in that comparison. We have to be accountable. And to be able, when somebody comes to us and talks to us about whatever that problem may be, that we can hold on to that and not let anybody else in that struggle. And that's tough. That's tough. And if you can't do that, if you can't hold on to somebody's struggle and you can't hold on to somebody's secret, and you know just as soon as they tell it, you're going to be like, oh, Lord, I got to go tell somebody else. Then just tell them, say, don't tell me. I'd rather not know. Just don't tell me. I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything, but if you tell me, I'm going to tell everybody else. I may tell them in the form of a prayer request, but I'm going to tell them. Okay? Like we need to pray for brother so-and-so because I've heard he's been struggling with some things. That kind of deal. We've got to be accountable to one another. Again, James says, confess our sins to one another. Pray for one another so that you may be healed. If we want to get this stuff out of our life, if we want to see ourselves grow and grow spiritually and grow healthy spiritually, then we've got to get the stuff out of our lives. We've got to lay the weights down. We've got to be willing to let somebody in. And then we've got to be willing to let God work in us. 1 John 1:9 says that if we confess our sins, that He is faithful and just to forgive us of all unrighteousness. Again, we've got to confess. We've got to come clean. We've got to open that wound up so that He can get the healing in that He so desires us to have. He wants us to be whole. He wants us to be healed. And listen, guys, if we let God in and we let God use the techniques and the mechanisms that He wants to use, if we start finding someone that we can be accountable to and help get that stuff out of our systems, then the healing and the process will begin. And then that story, that past, that struggle, that secret becomes a testimony for His glory, for all that He's done in our lives, because He says that He is faithful and just to forgive us of all of our sins. It's called righteousness. And we'll come back next week, we're going to talk about righteousness. We're going to talk about that measuring stick that people have long put in front of us. But that God, He knows our story. He knows our struggles. He knows our secrets. He knows every one of them. And we don't have to hide them. And like I said last week, He's looking at all of us saying, where are you? Where are you? Because He knows who we are. He knows what He made. And then He's saying, who told you that you were naked? Who's holding you back? Because He's telling you who you are, who He created. He has fearfully and wonderfully made you. And you can be everything that He wants you to be. But you've got to be willing. You've got to be willing to open it up so that God can completely make you whole. Let's stand.